Hi, I just want to talk to you about 11.5, which is human reproduction. In some ways, it's difficult to get through the whole thing because so much of it builds on Key Stage 3. If you didn't learn about human reproduction in Key Stage 3, I suggest you go back and have a recap of all that information. In biology, reproduction is a fast-paced field with what we're able to do is just incredible. In fact, the advances in biology have surpassed where we are in humanity and what is acceptable with society. But true to say, for most people, they spend the first half of their life trying to avoid this, and the second half of their reproductive life trying to get pregnant. So an understanding whether you're trying to avoid or whether you're trying to get, an understanding of your hormones that control fertilization and implantation and reproduction as a whole is really important. The main part of 11.5, the point it's trying to get across to you is what do the hormones actually do? But of course, to look at that, we need to look at the various parts of the reproductive system. Let's start with the female. Okay, remembering that we've got the master gland, which is the pituitary gland found in the brain. This is where the story starts. There's my pituitary gland, and it releases a hormone called follicle stimulating hormone. It travels all around the body, but actually causes an effect on the ovary. What it does is it's exactly what its name says. It's a follicle stimulating hormone. Inside the ovary, we've got a follicle that already contains the female egg. When the female is born, she contains all her eggs that she's going to release throughout her life. Yes, they are in an immature state, but they are there. And this is why problems arise when women have their babies late, because if you're 35 years old when you're having your baby, your eggs are also 35 years old. Where does the problem arise? We've said it's an immature egg. At that point, it contains 46 chromosomes. And of course, we know that we only want it to have 23 if it's going to go on and fertilize with a sperm cell. So it undergoes one more division before it's released. And it's that division that can sometimes end up uneven. We want it to turn into 2 eggs that have 23 chromosomes each. However, what actually happens is that we get an uneven split of 22 and 24. Now the 22 egg, in essence, is lacking information, and if fertilized, it's not going to survive. However, the one with 24 chromosomes has extra information. When the sperm fertilizes with it, we end up with 47 chromosomes. And how that presents itself is, if you remember on a carrier graph, when we line all the chromosomes up in order of size, we match them all together and we number the pairs. You've got 23 pairs. On the 21st chromosome, that's when we have an extra chromosome. So instead of 2, there's 3. And that 3rd chromosome is responsible for all the changes that happen if you have Down's syndrome. There's often, it's a syndrome, so it's a spectrum of disorders. There's lots of things wrong, and it can happen to varying degrees. So you can have some people who are Down syndrome who are highly functioning. They can hold down jobs and be, productive members of society. And you can have other Down syndrome that basically don't leave the house. So they can have heart problems, they can have intestinal problems, mental retardation, and all of these things to differing degrees. Okay, let's just forget about that for a moment then, and come back to here. Follicle stimulating hormone stimulates the follicle, the egg inside the follicle, to divide, and then eventually it's going to be ovulated out into the oviduct. Here's the uterus, the cervix, and the vagina. And in this upper reaches, that's where fertilization has to take place. If fertilization doesn't take place here, and the egg is here before it meets the sperm, the egg is already too old. So there's a very narrow window for fertilization to take place. Additional to that, the follicle stimulating hormone also causes the ovary to release estrogen. And when the egg is ovulated, this empty follicle, this empty sac in here, is then called the corpus luteum. And later on, that produces another hormone itself called progesterone. So let's just have a quick look at what are the functions of estrogen. Well, estrogen has a lot of functions when we're looking at secondary sexual characteristics. It causes the growth of the mammary glands, which you might call breasts, or I'm sure you've got other names for them. It also causes the widening of the hips. It encourages fat deposition to happen around the hips. Again, everything is geared towards reproduction and protecting your ovaries, protecting your whole reproductive system. On a monthly basis, estrogen is really important because what it does is it causes the build-up of blood on the uterus wall. This happens roughly every 28 days because when that fertilized egg moves its way down the oviduct, or the fallopian tube we can call that, it needs to implant into this odomentus. It's got lots of layers to it, it's very gappy if you like. It needs to implant somewhere in here until it grows big enough to grow its own placenta, where it will form a site of attachment to the uterus wall. Let's just consider that this blood-thick lining is shown on a graph. If I draw a graph very quickly like this, the menstrual cycle is 28 days long and we start on day 0 or day 1 if you like. Let's imagine that this up here is the thickness of the blood. This thickness here is represented here. Now we start counting from the menstrual cycle on the first day of menstruation, the first day of your period, the first day of your time of the month, whatever you want to call it. And the reason why we start counting on that day is because it's a very obvious day. Everybody knows when they start to bleed. It's unmissable. So in that day, you start to shed blood. So the amount of blood on your uterus wall is going to decrease. It decreases and decreases and decreases. And an average period lasts about 5 days. So on day 5 days after you started to bleed, there's no blood there. The blood then prepares another thick, fresh lining ready for implantation for the next month. Okay? So remembering back to our year 7 days, ovulation, the release of the egg, happens on day 14. So estrogen is very much active and very much needed in preparing this blood-thick lining. That is what estrogen does. Estrogen is released from the ovary in response to follicle-stimulating hormone. What happens then is the body assumes that you're pregnant. So progesterone, which is released from the empty follicle inside the ovary, is then the hormone that is pretty much dominant because it's thinking, yes, pregnancy has happened, let's keep the blood-thick lining nice and thick. However, after 28 days, if there is no fertilized egg, the follicle dies away and the progesterone levels fall and the whole cycle starts again. Now there is another hormone involved in this and it's called luteinizing hormone. We've got 4 hormones. Females are complicated beings. We've got follicle stimulating hormone and luteinizing hormone, both released from the pituitary gland in the brain. And we've got estrogen and progesterone, both released from the ovary. Now, I just wanted to do a quick recap of what's released and what it does today. Next lesson, we're going to be looking at the interactions of each of them and how the rise of one causes the drop of another, and so on.